By candlelight, in a room heavy with perfume and decay, she whispered to the dead. Her maid stood outside, trembling, as the queen murmured sweet nothings to the rotting skull of her husband. Every single night. They said it was grief. Others said it was madness. But what they found beneath the palace floor changed everything. Imagine a queen so obsessed with death, so wrapped in ritual, that her midnight conversations weren't just tragic, they were terrifying. This is the story of royalty, rot, and a woman who blurred the line between mourning and the macabre. They say power can drive a person mad, but what about grief? Long before she became the queen who whispered to the dead, she was a young girl shaped by loss. Born into nobility, her early life seemed destined for glory. Portraits of her as a child show a bright-eyed girl dressed in lace and pearls, smiling at the edge of grandeur. But behind the ornate curtains of her childhood palace, shadows crept in early. Her mother died of fever when she was only 9. Her younger brother succumbed to illness a year later. Each death was marked by days of ritual, wailing, incense, and silence. She learned early that death was not just an end, but a presence, a ritual, a haunting, and perhaps a companion. Her father, a deeply religious man with strange obsessions, forbade the mention of the dead in the house. He told her the soul stayed behind for 40 days, watching, listening. He insisted they must never cry too loudly or grieve too publicly, for fear of keeping the spirit trapped. This silence, enforced and unnatural, planted the seeds of her peculiar relationship with the dead. She was never allowed to say goodbye. Then came her arranged marriage at 16. Her husband was older, stoic, and already a rising political figure. She was beautiful, silent, and obedient, the perfect royal match. But behind palace doors, their relationship grew strange. He was cold, distant, yet something in his stiffness seemed to draw her in. Perhaps it reminded her of the lifelessness she'd grown so familiar with, or perhaps it made him easier to control. Then one day, everything changed. A carriage accident, sudden, brutal. Her husband was killed instantly, his body shattered, but miraculously preserved in one key way. His face was untouched. And that's where the story takes its turn. Rather than bury him, she ordered his body preserved. Not in the crypt, not in a coffin, but in her private chambers. The dead don't argue, the dead don't leave. And for her, the dead still listened. No one dared question her decision. Not the priests, not the royal advisors, not even the servants who were forced to walk past the stench of death every day. Her grief, they whispered, had become sacred, or maybe untouchable. She had the embalmer summoned in secret, bribed with gold and silence, and what happened behind the velvet curtains of her bedroom was the beginning of her descent into obsession. She had her husband's body, dressed in his finest court robes, his hands folded with care, his face powdered to hide the rot. Night after night, she sat beside him. At first, it was just mourning, speaking to him, asking for guidance, weeping in solitude. But then the tone began to shift. She began whispering about the affairs of the court, discussing state matters, asking him questions and then nodding slowly, as if she'd heard answers. She'd smile and say things like, "You always know best, my love." Maids reported seeing her lean in as if to kiss his hand, or hold imaginary conversations with him deep into the night. And then came the gifts. Every day she'd place fresh flowers on the bed where his preserved corpse sat, perfumed letters, small tokens, a lock of her own hair, trinkets from their wedding day. She spoke to him as though he was alive. Not in metaphor, but as reality. And over time, she no longer spoke about him to others. She spoke for him. Rumors began to ripple beyond the palace walls. Diplomats were told to address her husband in letters, still bearing his name alongside hers. She insisted that all major decisions must have his approval. It wasn't long before the court stopped trying to correct her. Fear crept in. Superstition was thick in those days. People believed madness could be contagious. Others whispered that the queen wasn't mad, but cursed. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. The corpse was no longer a relic of grief. It had become her king once more. The queen ruled in silence, but not alone. Her court bowed to her, yet feared the ghost she served. By now, the presence of the corpse had become a fixed part of court life. Ministers entered the royal chambers to deliver reports, not just to the queen, but to her dead husband. They'd bow to him, speak slowly, nervously, as if fearing he might suddenly respond. Some were too terrified to look directly at the body. Others simply played along, hoping not to fall out of favor. It was easier, they reasoned, to pretend than to provoke. After all, she was still their monarch. And behind her odd behaviors lay a sharp political mind. Despite her grief, or perhaps because of it, the queen's grip on power remained ironclad. She made strategic decisions, negotiated treaties, handled diplomacy with poise. But everything was filtered through the illusion. She insisted every major ruling be co-authored by her deceased husband. If anyone questioned this, she'd respond with a gentle smile and say, "He still speaks to me. He always has." Behind closed doors, things grew darker. There were reports, quietly buried in archives, of staff being dismissed for touching the corpse or moving anything in the Queen's room without permission. One servant, it said, was caught trying to open a window to let in fresh air. The Queen found out. By morning, he had vanished from the palace entirely. But was it madness or something else? Some historians argue she was merely playing a masterful game, that she used grief as a shield, a way to avoid remarriage, to keep full power, to control her image as a tragic but untouchable widow. Others believe she had truly lost touch with reality, her mind broken by the trauma of constant loss. Yet there were moments, fleeting, private, when the illusion cracked. One of her ladies-in-waiting later wrote in a secret diary that she found the Queen one night sitting beside the corpse, whispering, "Please come back, just for one more day." It wasn't power she longed for. It was love, twisted, decaying, but still love. And so, every night, the Queen lit her candles, dressed in mourning lace, sat beside the dead man she once called husband, and spoke to him as if he had never left. Some nights, they said you could hear her laughter echo through the stone. Other nights, she was crying. And then there were nights when she didn't sound human at all. As word of the Queen's bizarre behavior spread, so too did the fear. The palace staff began to speak in hushed tones, and servants refused to enter her wing after sunset. The Queen had not just kept her dead husband close, she had built a world for him. Behind the royal bedchamber, she ordered a new room constructed. Officially, it was called the Reflection Chamber, a private space for mourning. But among the staff, it was known by a different name, the Bone Room. This chamber was hidden from public view, sealed behind heavy velvet curtains and guarded at all times. Few knew what lay inside. Those who did spoke only of red candles, floor-to-ceiling drapery, and an altar made of carved ebony wood, always set with flowers, rosary beads, and, most disturbingly, bones. The Queen believed she could preserve more than just a body. She believed she could preserve a soul. She began collecting relics of death, bits of hair, fragments of cloth, teeth from deceased relatives, even pieces of jewelry said to have belonged to long-dead saints. These were laid in careful arrangements near her husband's body, like offerings. What started as a shrine soon became a ritual space. She kept a strict schedule. Every night at midnight, she dismissed her attendants and entered the chamber alone. For exactly 1 hour, no one was allowed to disturb her. Those who disobeyed were fired, or worse. One chambermaid who peeked through the keyhole was later found muttering to herself in the garden, refusing to speak again. She died months later in a convent, still silent. What went on inside that room? Theories abounded. Some said she practiced necromancy. Others believed she performed weddings between herself and the dead. A few even claimed she had learned to speak with ghosts, not metaphorically, but literally. Whatever the truth, her midnight rituals became legend. And for those within the palace, a living nightmare. She wore lilac and rosewater to mask the stench, but no perfume could hide what he'd become. Despite her efforts to preserve him, The queen's husband, embalmed though he was, began to change. At first, it was subtle. His skin grew darker, leathery. His fingers curled inward. The royal dressers struggled to keep his garments clean. Soon, a permanent team was assigned to refresh his appearance weekly, repainting his face, adjusting his posture, even stitching shut areas where the flesh had begun to split. But no one was allowed to speak of the rot. The queen forbade it. She filled her quarters with sweet-smelling oils, lit frankincense and myrrh every night, and demanded all visiting nobles wear gloves perfumed with clove and violet. "It keeps the spirits calm," she would say. Behind closed doors, however, she became increasingly obsessed with preserving what little remained. She consulted physicians, alchemists, even foreign mystics. One traveling apothecary claimed he could stop decomposition entirely, for a price. He was paid in jewels and disappeared the following morning, leaving behind only a note that read, "Some things are meant to pass." But she wouldn't give up. She ordered the palace kitchens to supply her with honey by the barrel, an ancient Egyptian method of preservation. When honey failed, she tried wine. When that failed, she turned to stronger methods. One palace record shows a sudden and unexplained import of arsenic, mercury, and camphor, all known, even then, to be deadly. Servants began to fall ill. One footman collapsed after cleaning the queen's chamber. Another developed a hacking cough that never left him. The stench became so thick that tapestries along the hall were changed weekly in an attempt to trap it. Still, the queen remained unaffected, or rather, undeterred. To her, the decay was simply part of the process. "He is becoming divine," she told one terrified handmaid. "The soul is stripping away the flesh. Soon, only the spirit will remain." The girl nodded and fled the court the next day. By now, her rituals had taken a darker turn. She no longer merely spoke to him, she sang, chanted, sometimes screamed. One night, guards reported a strange glow from under her door, followed by complete silence. The next morning, she emerged smiling. They watched her. She watched them, but none of them watched him, because they couldn't bear to look. As the queen's midnight rituals grew more intense, the palace became a house of whispers. The nobility pretended all was well in public. Dinners were held, courtiers danced, diplomats smiled. But behind every fan flutter and wine sip, there was one quiet question. How long could this go on? Some began to fear she would die beside him. Others believed she was waiting for him to rise. But there were those who were not content to wait. A small faction within the court, led by her late husband's cousin, began to investigate. They didn't just want to know what she was doing, they wanted proof, something they could use to have her quietly removed, declared unfit to rule. Not out of pity, but power. So, they paid the palace mason. Under the cover of darkness, the old servant was ordered to install hidden observation panels into the queen's private chambers, thin slits built into ornamental walls. From these gaps, hidden behind carved roses and saints, one could spy directly into the reflection chamber. A young scribe was chosen to observe the rituals. He was instructed to remain silent, document everything, and leave at dawn. What he wrote became one of the most chilling royal journals ever found. He described the queen dressed entirely in black lace, sitting in front of the corpse with hands folded. Sometimes she wept, sometimes she laughed, but most often she simply stared, hours at a time. No movement, no speech, just watching. Then came the whispering. "She speaks in a language I cannot place," the scribe wrote. "It is neither Latin nor French nor any tongue I know. It is as if she is mimicking words, like a child imitating adults. But the rhythm is strange, like chanting underwater." In one entry, the scribe claimed the queen placed her ear against the corpse's chest, as if listening for a heartbeat. On the 7th night, he refused to return. He left behind a final entry. "Tonight she looked directly into the wall where I sat. She smiled. I heard her say, 'He sees you too.' I do not know who she meant." The queen never mentioned the hidden panels, but a week later, they were mysteriously sealed shut, and the man who ordered their installation was found drowned in the palace well. She ordered a feast the night before she died. Candles, music, enough food for two. After years of nightly rituals, whispered madness, and a court held in trembling silence, the Queen's health began to fade. But not in the way one might expect. She was not frail, not senile. If anything, she became more lucid, sharper, more deliberate, like someone who knew the end was near and was finally ready. Then one morning, without warning, she announced a royal banquet. The court was stunned. She had not hosted a formal gathering in years. Some assumed it was a political maneuver, others feared it might be another bizarre display of grief. But when the day arrived, the Queen appeared radiant. Dressed in deep burgundy with silver lace, her hair swept back and crowned in jet gemstones, she looked younger than she had in a decade. She entered the ballroom not with sorrow, but purpose. She toasted her guests, spoke eloquently, even laughed. But what unsettled everyone was the second chair at her table, placed beside her, draped in gold cloth and topped with a small crown. No one dared ask. No one touched it. Throughout the meal, she occasionally turned to the chair, nodded, or whispered softly. "He always loved duck," she said once, smiling to no one. It was theatre, or insanity, or something in between. That night, she returned to her chambers alone. She dismissed her guards, her maids, even her favourite ladies-in-waiting. "No one tonight," she said. "Only him." The next morning, she was found in her bed, peaceful, hands crossed, still wearing her jewels. But what made the scene unforgettable was what lay beside her. Not the corpse, that was gone. In its place was a note, written in the Queen's own hand. "You were never dead to me. Only waiting." The room smelled of lilac. The bedsheets were untouched, and there was no trace of rot, blood, or embalming cloth. The body had vanished. A dead man doesn't just walk away, but he was gone. Every bone, every thread, every trace. The Queen's death sent shockwaves through the kingdom, but it was the disappearance of the corpse that ignited true hysteria. For years, her chambers had been a grotesque sanctuary for her embalmed husband. Guards had stood watch, servants had tiptoed in terror, witnesses had seen the decaying body with their own eyes. And now, it was simply gone. A full royal inquiry was launched. The Queen's bedroom was sealed, searched inch by inch. The reflection chamber was torn apart, panels were removed, floorboards lifted, secret compartments uncovered, nothing. No bones, no wrappings, no remnants of the dead king at all. The embalmers were questioned. One wept openly, swearing he had last seen the corpse only days before. "I reapplied his face powder," he said. "I remember, the left cheek had split." Others claimed to have handled the body within the past week, and one maid said she had delivered lavender sachets to keep the smell down. None of them had an explanation for how the body could vanish without a trace. At first, officials suspected a cover-up, that the Queen herself had arranged for a secret burial. But where? The royal crypts were untouched. No fresh earth, no newly sealed tombs. The palace grounds were combed, wells drained, walls knocked. Then came the more disturbing theories. Some believed the Queen had burned the body herself in a private cremation ritual, leaving no remains. Others thought the corpse had never been real, a mannequin perhaps, or an elaborate delusion. But that theory crumbled under the weight of dozens of accounts, from guards, attendants, even foreign ambassadors, who had seen the body themselves. And then a diary surfaced. It belonged to one of her closest ladies-in-waiting. In it, she described a chilling conversation only days before the Queen's death. "He doesn't need this shell much longer," Her Majesty told me. "Soon, he will be with me in the way that matters. You'll see, the body was just a vessel, and vessels break." The court didn't know what to believe, but what they feared most wasn't that the Queen had lost her mind. It was that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't. They called her mad, but years later they still speak of her in hushed voices, not with scorn, but awe. After the Queen's death, The palace was never the same. Some rooms were permanently sealed, others were quietly renamed as if to erase the memory of what had taken place within those walls. But memories like hers don't fade, they root deep. The court divided into factions. Some insisted she had been mentally unwell, a tragic figure swallowed by grief and superstition. They rewrote official records, downplayed her eccentricities, painted her as a widow too tender-hearted to let go. But others, especially those who had witnessed her final years, weren't so sure. There were strange events that continued even after her death. One guard claimed to hear two voices speaking softly in her former chambers at night, even though they were empty. A maid reported finding fresh rose petals on the windowsill where the Queen used to sit. And on the 1-year anniversary of her passing, a crimson glove, the kind she always wore, appeared neatly folded at the foot of her old bed. There was no dust on it. In rural areas, stories spread like wildfire. The Queen became a ghost story, then a myth. Some claimed she was a necromancer. Others said she had been cursed or blessed with the power to speak beyond the veil. Lovers who lost their partners would leave offerings at the gates of her estate, begging for the same devotion, the same miracle. In secret, a cult formed, a small, quiet order of mourners who called her the Widow Saint. They believed she had not merely preserved her husband's body, but his soul, that she had proven love could survive death, and even defy it. Centuries later, historians still debate her legacy. Was she a woman driven mad by loss, unable to let go of the past? Or was she something rarer, a monarch who refused to play by the rules of life and death? Her story is not one of romance, nor is it simply horror. It's a reminder that the deepest human emotions, grief, obsession, love, are not always separate. And sometimes they echo long after the candles go out. They say love conquers all, but what if it conquers death, and never lets it go? The tale of the Queen who spoke to corpses every night isn't just a story about royalty or madness. It's about the unbearable weight of grief, the human refusal to let go, and how devotion, unchecked, can twist into something terrifyingly sacred. We'll never know what truly happened behind those velvet curtains, whether she was broken by loss or blessed with some unknowable gift. What we do know is this: she left behind more than just a mystery, she left a legend. So the next time you hear footsteps where there should be silence, or feel someone watching when you're alone, maybe it's just the wind, or maybe she's still waiting for an answer.